Hi, and welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns, CEO of the University Innovation Alliance. Each week, I team up, typically with a journalist, to have a conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor to better understand what it's like to lead in this very complex moment and to surface some insights and perspective about their leadership. So this week, that is certainly the case, and I am delighted. While I am flying solo today, I am really delighted to bring on the president of the University of Texas, San Antonio. Thank you so much for being with us today. President, is Eighmy? I just realized that I didn't actually double check your pronunciation.
It's Eimy, yeah.
Okay.
Just call me Taylor, please.
Taylor, it is it is excellent. That pronunciation, so much easier than I could have done. So for those of you at home who are not familiar, President Eighmy is the sixth president of the University of San Antonio, and he came here in 2017. But one of the things I find really interesting is that his perspective as president comes from, he brings a unique vantage point, having been a chief research officer, vice president for research at 3 universities prior to this. So at Texas Tech, University of New Hampshire, and the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. So that's a really interesting, I think, perspective on the presidency. And then also seeing the stuff that you've been doing at UT San Antonio. I just wanted to have a conversation with you. And so thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, it's a delight to be with you, Bridget, and I appreciate all the work that you do in your efforts to advance student success, and that's something we care about greatly. I have to admit, my progression as a researcher to a president is something I never envisioned back when I was younger, and there are a few of us in higher ed, especially in public higher ed, who have sort of taken this path to presidencies, having been chief research officers. Kirk Schultz at Washington State is a good example. There are others, Florida State, Northern Illinois. There's a cadre of us. We constitute some kind of mafia, I think, in terms of our focus. But I think it's a useful perspective to have when you become a president, the opportunity as a chief research officer to always advocate and make a case for what you care about, whether you're writing proposals or advocating for partnerships or pulling teams together. You're constantly talking about what you're doing and why it's important, and that's a lot of what you do as a president. So it feels very comfortable for me as president now to build on my strengths, my prior strengths as a chief research officer, and put those to good use as we embark on our engagement with the legislature here in Texas, or with donors, or with our city and county partners. I'm always in the business of talking about my institution. By the way, I have the best job in the world, and UTSA is a remarkable place, so it's an easy thing to talk about and advocate for.
Well, I am super interested in that and teasing out a little bit more on that perspective, because when we were talking earlier, just to see leading up to the show, I really appreciated your perspective that in order to be the chief research officer, that you had to be more collaborative than perhaps other parts of the institution. And so I think that's that's an interesting angle to take in terms of thinking about the kinds of characteristics that traditional roles bring, like provost and otherwise. But can you say a little bit more about why you think the CRO would bring, why do you think it's more collaborative in its nature, and how does that show up as president when you are, frankly, trying to figure out how to make decisions internally? How does that actually assist?
Yeah, so I think most chief research officers who become presidents would say exactly what I'm about to say, and it has to do with this, that it is a less obvious trajectory or pathway to a presidency. But if you think about it, most chief research officers have come up through the ranks of obviously being a researcher themselves, collaborating with others inside their own institution and outside their institution with other institutions. They've frequently worked on big initiatives that involve pulling people together and going after big things, typically with our philanthropic community or federal agencies or the private sector. So we've always been in the business of pulling people together to collaborate to do big things. And I think as you become a chief research officer at an institution, you are empowered to do that in a very big way on behalf of the entire institution, where your prior kind of areas of effort might have involved your own personal growth as a researcher, or your work as a director of an institute or some kind of major research program. But when you wear a CRO hat, you're doing it on behalf of the whole institution. And so you're in the business of working with deans, department chairs, faculty members, chief research office staff, collaborators that are at other institutions, collaborators that are typically vice presidents for research at companies that you're collaborating with, or with not-for-profits that you're working with. So it's just naturally a collaborative environment, and all of that lends itself to learning how to collaborate and how to bring people together to support good ideas and big causes, and how to develop consensus around what you're working on. So I would actually say it has served me immensely well in my trajectory as an administrator and leading towards my presidency. And I'm grateful for all that background that I had in that space, because I was an individual researcher. I was a director of a research group and a director of a cooperative institute, and then as I kind of ascended into the higher levels of research administration, I got to work on these kinds of collaborations all the time. And so it prepares you for what you want to try and do as a president, because frequently the things that you work on involve communication, collaboration, consensus, rethinking great ideas, refining great ideas, and turning those great ideas into action. So I think it's a logical pathway.
It makes so much sense to me now as you're describing it, but yeah, it would make a more collaborative role, because you can't actually just tell people what to do with research.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have the luxury of being in a position where you just kind of like, it's my way or the highway. Not that that's the kind of leadership we're looking for, but there are positions where you have the luxury of being able to set a vision and then tell people what to do. And like, it's, do it or don't, right? But as someone who's done collaborative research, as someone who runs a collaborative that is run through the research office at an institution, it is constant compromise, and it is consensus building. So that's an interesting perspective. For those of you in the audience who are either part of a search firm or your institution searching, we always put the word salad of what kind of candidates and characteristics we're looking for, but that's something you should consider, is perhaps advancing that someone who isn't just a researcher, but someone who's actually had to oversee and supervise collaborative research would actually bring you the kind of collaborative leader you're looking for. To
elaborate just a little bit more, it's worth doing this. Typically, as a chief research officer, at least at most R1 institutions, you have a very important role to pull together big ideas that come from your faculty and come from your collaborations internal to the institution and across institutions. And some of the biggest things I worked on as a chief research officer involved going after really big things from the Department of Energy or National Science Foundation or NIH around multi-institutional collaborations. And you typically have to be conveying the distilled essence of what you're working on, so it's so compelling that one of these federal partners is going to support it. So you have the whole peer review process you have to prepare for, or the site visit process that you have to prepare for, and you're always having to distill and make very clear the inherent benefit and purpose of what you're doing, so it aligns with the mission of who you're trying to encourage to fund your big idea. And so you're in the process of really telling a compelling story and leading with your heart about why you believe it's important. And And frankly, a lot of what presidents get to do now, whether it's fundraising or work, at least for public institutions working with state legislatures, you have to be making these compelling cases all the time. So I think chief research officers have really honed their skills in this space, and that prepares them for the wonders and joys of seeking public support or seeking philanthropic support. Those are really some of the fun things you get to do as a president. So I think it's a good pathway.
Well, so let's talk a little bit more about your leadership beyond just the perspective of your prior roles and how it influenced, how you lead. I'm curious about, for most folks, there's someone they can think of who they learned how to be a leader from, or they, kind of characteristics to emulate, or they can remember very viscerally someone they never want to be like. And so I'm just curious about, as you think about your leadership journey, throughout your career, where did you learn the most? And was it either from a good example or a bad example about how
I don't know if my career path is all that different from other presidents. I worked at a number of institutions, the University of New Hampshire, then Texas Tech University, then the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, and now here at UTSA, this marvelous institution. And I think when we chatted last, I shared that I had worked for maybe 10 or 11 or 12, I can't keep track of it all, but CEOs across those institutions, some permanently appointed, appointed, others were interim in nature. But I saw when those times happened, when crystallization of focus and purpose occurred, and the cabinet at the institution was so aligned about where the institution was going, and I saw the role that a president or a chancellor had in pulling together teams that could work together to do the merry work, the very altruistic work of typically of what administrators do is you push rocks uphill. And I saw the conditions under which that worked really well. And the leaders that affected me, influenced me in a very positive way were the ones that worked really hard to assemble teams that were perfectly aligned and very, very collaborative in nature. Because, certainly this work is challenging and hard and relentless in terms of the intensity of it at times. And so you need a team that's cohesive and focused and collaborative and supportive of each other. And I saw elements where that came together. And so I vowed that I would work really hard and do my very best to assemble the same sort of team to work with me as we prepared to work here at UTSA. And so, I've been fortunate across the span of my career to have people that have taken me under their wing. And the one that really comes to mind for me is the one president that I worked for that actually sort of activated me about my thinking about my potentially being a president someday. And that was Guy Bailey, who's presently the president at UT Rio Grande Valley. So he's at a sister institution to mine within the University of Texas system. But he hired me to be his chief research officer at Texas Tech when he was the president there. And I had not given any thought to being a president. I was basically clueless about thinking about those kinds of things, even as a chief research officer. And when I landed at Texas Tech, he was a very powerful mentor to me and supported me, always gave me degrees of freedom and broad swim lanes to work on stuff, and empowered me to be very bold in my leadership and to go after big things, to dream big, go big. And he was always the person saying to me, Taylor, you're going to be a president someday, and I want to help you, and I'm happy to mentor you. And he did. And who would have thought that I would end up where I've ended up? But he was a very powerful influence for me. And so I'm really, really grateful to Guy for his belief in me, his mentoring in me. And we've become, obviously, we're both presidents within the University of Texas system, but he is a dear, dear friend in addition to being a colleague. So I'm really grateful for that. And the kinds of things that he espoused and believed in as a mentor to me are the kinds of things that I really believe in now myself. So, those are powerful connections.
I find it interesting that so Freeman Hrabowski does that, where he frequently will tap people and he'll be like, I don't know if you see this, but I see this in you. And I find that it's a small collection of presidents who do that. And then, so it's either you are on the hunt and helping tap and identify people, and you are always looking for that talent and helping them see that in themselves, or radio silence. I don't find that it's actually like everyone does that with 2 or 3 people. It's that there are certain people who feel like it is part of their leadership journey to help other to help identify future leaders. And then there are others who are, their leadership is their leadership, and they're kind of focused on their own lane. And so I would bet there are other people who he has.
There are. Yeah, I think Dr. Bailey, the last count I did was, I think he's mentored at least 10 people who have become presidents, which is, I think that's probably unparalleled within higher ed or public higher ed. So it's pretty powerful evidence. When I've had the chance of and the opportunity to hire wonderful people to work with in all of my positions, as starting as a faculty member all the way up to being a president. And hiring people is really, really an important part of one's job. And to do it well and to do it right is requires energy and purpose and maybe a little bit of luck. And I would say this. I've always had this philosophy that, and I don't know if I had to go back and do it over, I'm not sure I would change, but I've learned over time that my refinement of this is important. But I've always believed that to serve in higher education as a leader, you have to fundamentally be an altruist, selfless. You have to enjoy hard work. You have to be an optimist. You have to have a sense of humor. And you have to really, really enjoy pushing rocks up a hill. I made mention of that already earlier in our conversation, but I believe it's true. And to all the folks that I've hired, I think this has been common to every conversation I've had over the last 20 years when I've hired folks, but especially in more senior roles as the chief research officer and now president. I say this, I'd much rather hire someone who has these attributes and believes in the inherent nobility of the mission of the institution, but I don't necessarily want them to come here and be here forever. I want them to come here and grow and get ready to prepare for what's next in their life. And I want them to get ready to fly. And I'd rather have someone like that for 3 or 5 years to come and make a difference. And then they fly off and do something bigger and bolder. And that's a good thing for them, for the institution, for me, for everybody. And it's just one of my philosophies. And so I do really want the folks that I work with to be mentored individually, but also from a team perspective. And I want them to shine and do so well that they're not here forever. They go off and do something even bigger and better. So that's a really important thing for me to believe deeply in.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think that you do. I mean, there are some people who perhaps hide their optimism more than others, but I do think it is about exposing.
Yeah.
It is about identifying potential. That you have to see the potential of everything, because otherwise you're making really hard decisions constantly, and it's a real bummer of a job if you only see the glass half full. But it is also about helping people achieve their potential. I mean, it is something about. I think you're right. Inherently, it does require optimism.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially especially over the last 2.5 years with a pandemic, and here in Texas, at least, a economic downturn in 2020. So it goes much better if you're inherently an optimist. And
yeah, there's no, I mean, for folks who are concerned, who are negative about the moment, I'm just like, higher ed's literally, we need to rise to the moment.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
The solution to many of the problems that we're worried with and that we're concerned about, whether it's the future of our democracy or the economic competitiveness of our country, higher ed is literally at the center of those. And so it's not about doing exactly what we've done before, but it's about actually living up to the promise. And that's going to require some small changes. But I mean, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, right? This is the place where it's the nexus of the future.
I had a chance through my work with APLU to get an update about the Boyer 2030 Commission, and which is exciting in its own right, that it's going back to the 1998 original Boyer Commission report on undergraduate education. And I don't, this makes me old fashioned, I think, but some of the, if not all of the recommendations that came out of Boyer in 1998 are actually still relevant today, or perhaps even more so today than in 1998. And I do know that the Boyer 2030 Commission is going back and looking at so many of the things that were important then and adding to that. But some of the things that we have to do now to make the understanding of the value of a higher ed degree, that whole effort to explain that, to have people understand it, to have people believe it, is such an important aspect of where higher ed has to go. And some of the tenets, I actually believe all 10 of the recommendations that came out of Boyer in 1998 are essential today, even more so. So, this whole thing about how we think about the value proposition, what's going on now with Carnegie and ACE working on measuring universities around economic mobility and the impact that an undergraduate education has had on preparing a student to go out and change the world. All those things are still really, really important. And if you believe deeply in higher education like I do, that it's the most transformative thing in the world, that it will impact someone's trajectory, individual life trajectory, in such a profound way, if you believe that, it's okay to be an optimist about everything.
I agree. I think that too much we're seeing things from right here, and so of course it's very scary and hard. But the more you can zoom out and look at history, you'll see that there's plenty to be excited about. And I think that there are some things that are really, I'm seeing some actual movement that is very cool in terms of communicating with the public, and whether it's the Gates, what they've done on the Value Commission. But I also love something that for folks at home, you might pop over to YouTube and take a look at Study Hall, which is something ASU is doing in partnership with, and this is, if you are on TikTok, or especially for younger folks, they will know this name, but Hank Green, who's a prolific social media influencer on science. They are creating a bunch of videos that basically handle all the questions that we know that the public has, whether it's how to pay for college, how to college, right? If you get a chance, take a look at those videos and look at the comment section. It is mind blowing. Like, people are just like, wow, this is all I've ever needed, was this 4-minute video, right? The simplicity of language that we're showing that you can do is, so there's some evidence there. But the other is, I just keep seeing that it's institutions only thinking, being obsessed with the boundaries of their own institutions, right? Like, that's our problem. The more we can actually think and have leadership as a sector, we will actually start listening to what the public says, and we will respond in a way that they can understand what we're talking about and the value of higher ed. But problematic.
We had Ted Mitchell in to visit there's an association of public university presidents and chancellors here in Texas. The acronym is SPUPSI. It's a good group of folks. And we had Ted Mitchell come in and talk about where ACE and Carnegie are collaborating about, really developing another classification for universities around economic mobility, and all the foundational work they're doing to prepare for putting forward a model about that. And I think it's really, really important that they do that. But Ted was sharing some information about their focus groups. They've been doing a ton of focus groups. And what's interesting to me, if you look at all the stressors out there about the perceptions of higher ed, especially public higher ed, you can read about them every week in the New York Times or the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed. And there are a lot of stressors out there. But what the focus groups that ACE has been doing, they're really coming out and saying, look, the cost of attendance is really tough. Get us in a situation where our family members, our sons and daughters can graduate on time with a degree that's meaningful, with a job opportunity that's out there that they're going to be able to go to. Those are the things that we care about the most. It's show us that you pay attention to the average time of attendance. Is it less than 5 years? Is it less than 4.5 years? And then show us that me as a student, or my son and daughter or family member is going to graduate into a program and an opportunity and an expansive view of the world that involves a job that I know will pay well. And the fact that that's still an issue, it's always been an issue for public higher ed, but it still comes back to that as an issue. Those are solvable things. Those are things that we can address as presidents and as institutions, as public university systems. So, the fact that it boils down to those two issues is not an intractable problem. It's a solvable problem. So that's why I remain optimistic about where public higher ed can go, despite the distractions that are out there too.
Yeah, I think the thing we have to just address is the cacophony of voices of come to this institution. We are the most bloobity boop of boobity boop. We are the best of this, or what, like that. That is just overwhelming to the public in terms of understanding what a good institution is. Should I actually go there? How do I trust this? And that the fact that marketing and PR is happening times 4,000 to 7,000 institutions, it creates this just massive noise that disconnects us from the public. So at some point, us as a sector, not just talking about how you should come to my institution, but just as a sector, here's why how we should talk about college that is actually listening to what the public is asking.
Actually, Third Way just revised their sort of their evaluations of economic mobility. They came out with their report in January or February, and then updated it and put it into, instead of individual rankings, into tiered groups. And the fact that so many think tanks now in Carnegie and the University of Texas system and other systems here in Texas and state legislatures are looking at this whole issue of what is the value of the education that's been provided? How have you prepared this young person to go out into the world? The fact that question is coming to the fore now will resolve the cacophony of noise that's out there, because so much of what I think families care about these days are the issues I just described, and economic mobility is such a profound part of that. So, that's, public institutions, I think, have to pay attention to this a little bit more than private institutions. It's important for all of higher ed to pay attention to this. But if you think about how we're preparing young people to make the world a better place, this mobility aspect is just an important component.
It's huge. All right, so let's go to rapid fire. Before we wrap, I want to make sure that we get the best advice someone has ever given you in your career. Who was it? What did they say? And help us kind of get a sense of why that was valuable to you.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my good friend and colleague, Guy Bailey, who said to me one day, "Taylor, you're going to be a president." And I'm like, huh? What? And I'm glad I listened to him, and I'm glad that he mentored me in that way. So, I've had other people who've had a profound impact on me. I shared with you this story of my wandering in the wilderness as an undergrad when I was at Tufts University, starting as a chem eng, taking a year off, doing mechanical engineering in the year off, and then coming back as a biologist. I had this profound moment when I went into the biology department because I love biology, and I found a professor at Tufts who's still there, Dr. Jan Pachenik. He brought me into his environment and as an undergraduate researcher in his lab, and I had a chance to do research with him, and it affected everything from there on in my life, because I loved research so much and I loved discovery so much. And who would have thought that activation of me as a young learner who became so passionate about something, that it would have come from a mentor-mentee relationship as an undergrad. So that was also a very powerful thing for me, and I celebrate that all the time. I stay in touch with Jan, and I'm glad that he did what he did. I wouldn't be here today without him.
That's great. I love that. When mentorship really, we talk about it as though something we want to scale in our but seeing the actual product is wonderful. Is there a book that you recommend most frequently to people who are interested in leadership?
Well, I'm learning as I go, and I'm really focusing on how my leadership team here at UTSA can develop as a team and as we go through the new normal coming out of the pandemic. And I am intrigued about this Daniel Goleman work that was published in the Harvard Business Review back in 2004 about what makes a leader. But I also have to say, I can't give up my background as a former chief research officer. So Jonathan Cole's book on this concept of towards a more perfect university is another thing I like to recommend. In addition to his earlier work on, great American universities, and obviously Michael Crow's work on where universities are going. All those were good reading materials for me and my leadership team. So.
Great. Well, this has been super helpful for those at home. I appreciate you joining us today. And President Eighmy, I feel like this has been a great conversation and helps people understand kind of how you look at the work at the presidency, and it helps everyone else to understand that there is this. I just think that the headline is around the idea of VPs for research being a pipeline of talent that we should intentionally cultivate and seek to bring into searches. The more that we're looking for the kind of characteristics that you've talked to us about. So I think that's great. So hopefully search firms are just updating their lists.
And I would also add that this notion that, we just formed this alliance of Hispanic serving research universities, and UTSA is a proud member of that alliance, and the focus that you can have as a discovery enterprise, but as an institution that excels in student success and economic mobility, that's a powerful combination right there. So I'm very lucky to be sitting in the seat that I sit in and have the colleagues that I have and the mission that we have here in South Texas and in San Antonio. It's a great place, and our purpose is really bold and really noble, and it makes every day a joy.
Wonderful. And we're getting all the comments are rolling in. People are loving this conversation. So thank you again. And it's been just really wonderful to get to know you. So I hope you have a wonderful week. For those of you ahead, we are out there in the audience. We hope that this has been inspiring and giving you a little bit to chew on as you think about your own leadership in the week ahead.
Bridget, thank you very much. You take care. I appreciate what you do.